person, speaker, and founder, CEO, and instructor at Bayyina and the Institute of Arabic and Quranic Studies. Since Ustadh Nouman had founded Bayyina Institute in 2006, he has taught over 30,000 students through traveling seminars and programs. With 1.7 million followers on Facebook and garnering several million views on YouTube. I honestly could not believe I would even meet him, let alone introduce him in front of hundreds of people. So without further ado, one of the most influential young Western academics. Please welcome Ustadh Nouman Ali Khan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. There's quite a few people standing in the back. Wow, you guys should squeeze together in some room. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thumma amma ba'd. First of all, a disclaimer before I begin, and that is that I did travel. I drove here from Boston, and so I'm a little bit disheveled and disoriented, so if I don't make any sense, don't blame me. And by the time you get to say anything, I'll be driving off anyway. So I'm safe. That's the community's problem thereafter. But thankfully, I'm actually, first of all, very, very grateful to have the opportunity to see all of you and to share some thoughts with all of you. I've been perplexed about what to speak to you about today, and I did suggest a title, which is an excerpt from a verse in the Quran, a small passage from the Quran, or really even a bit of a verse, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ, which roughly means cooperate with each other and aid one another in matters of goodness and in matters that protect each other and protect yourselves from disappointing the expectations of God. It's a comprehensive term, taqwa. وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ, and don't cooperate with each other or aid one another in anything that leads to penalty, that leads anyone down the path of harm or sin, وَالْعُدْوَانِ, nor anything that adds to animosity. Now that statement, what I wanted to do first and foremost, it's going to be weird, and that's okay. I was called an academic. I am the last thing from an academic you can imagine. But I will share some things with you in order to get the point across. Sometimes I use very strange examples. I am not ashamed to do so because my career started by teaching kindergarten. And if you can teach those creatures, you can get through anything. You really can. And you lose all of your inhibitions. The things you have to do to get the attention of a 5-year-old, you cannot imagine. But anyway, so what I'd like to start with is a story of myself, reprimanding one of my children. I have 7 of those. And let's say I'm reprimanding one of my eldest daughters, right? And she's gotten in trouble because she didn't finish her homework, and she didn't tell me that it's overdue, and I got a call from her teacher that she hasn't handed it in for 2 days, and now there's about to be a storm brewing inside the house. So I call Ustadh over and I say, so young lady, what's going on here with this homework situation? And she, hoping that I have no idea that what's transpired or I've spoken to her teacher, says nothing, and now it's going to begin, because now you're in denial on top of, damning evidence. Now I'm going to give her a good old-fashioned, how could you do this? I expect you to be honest with me. You're supposed to finish your homework on that. I can't believe your teacher called me and told me that I'm doing all of this. And her 5-year-old sister walks up, stands next to me and says, yeah! Ashamed of yourself. Now, the reason I'm painting this story to you is because as I am getting upset at my daughter for missing her homework, I'm actually quite peculiarly upset also with this 5-year-old rugrat over here who thinks that somehow she's in a position of authority to add to the scolding and all of a sudden gets a chance to act like the parent, because she's not. She's also a child. She's not in that position. I speak from a position of parenting, which is a position somewhat, we like to pretend, of authority, right? But she's not. She's a sibling. Even a sibling, even if her twin or someone of the same age was to join in on the scolding, she doesn't have the right to. Similarly, if I was to give you another scenario in which a teacher in a classroom is actually pointing out the mistakes of one of the students in the class, it's not okay for the student, the peer, sitting next to the said student, to start reprimanding them as well. That's not their position. You understand where I'm going with this? Okay, well, I want you to have this background as just take a quick step back, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the content of the Quran. It's my faith and the faith of, yes. It's my faith and the faith of almost a fifth of the world's population, that this is the verbatim word of God. And that God is speaking in this book, the Quran. But he speaks from a position of authority. God, clearly, creator of the heavens and the earth, creator of man, and the sole master, the sole object of worship, and the sole one recipient worthy of worship to all existence, can speak from a position of authority. If he wants to get angry at someone, he can. And if he wants to be happy with someone, he can be. And if he wants to pass a verdict on something, he can, because he is the ultimate authority. That's my faith. The problem, though, is when he speaks from a position of authority, it doesn't give me license to speak from a position of authority. I cannot assume his position. So for instance, if he gets angry at someone in this sacred text, that actually is not the license for me to get angry at the same person. It isn't, because that's not my place. That's why I gave you that silly example in the beginning. I want to share with you something that some of you might find offensive, but you know what? I'm not here to appease anybody. I'm actually here to talk as straightforward as I can, and to be candid with you. Yes, the book is, in fact, very politically incorrect. Yes, it does have it criticizes people that believe other things. It challenges them. It challenged the Christian community living in Medina. It challenged the Jewish community living in Medina. Before, I'll tell you a little bit of that revelation story, but early on when the revelation began in the career of our prophet, it was the revelation was coming down to a multi-religious society. People worship different gods. And this revelation, without any reservation, criticized what other people were practicing and questioned them. It didn't make fun of them. It simply asked them to question the basis of their faith. But it did. It didn't shy away from making such criticisms. Now, one such kind of criticism was made. I want to share the story with you because it's, I think, relevant to our conversation here. Our prophet has already migrated to a city called Medina, where he's been given safe haven. So that where he originally preached, the people were at this point bloodthirsty for him. He barely escaped with his life with a handful of believers, and now they've set up a community in this new city called Medina. And as they live there, people hear of a man claiming to be a prophet. And a group of Christians, Jacobite Christians actually, from what is now closer to Syria, hear of this man claiming to be a prophet and confirming what is there in the gospel and the old scripture. So they want to hear from himself. So a group of them, these are actually ministers, you can say, a group of ministers. They come as a caravan and they want to meet with this prophet. And they want to spend some time with him. Back then, you didn't have the Holiday Inn Express or the Hyatt or the Marriott. You don't have the hotel industry taking people yet with hidden fees. So where are these people supposed to stay for the few weeks that they're here? It's not like they flew in and they're going to fly out the next day. They travel by camel and by horseback for months at a time, and they're going to stay at least a few weeks, if not months, and then they're going to head back. These people they stayed inside the mosque of the Prophet. That was their guest house. That's where they stayed. And of course, these are ministers. These are people of religion. So they are probably going to be engaged in daily acts of worship in accordance with their own faith. And guess where they performed all of their Christian rituals? Inside the mosque of the Prophet, under his own supervision. They were preferred guests of the Prophet himself in that mosque. Now, I want to contrast this with Revelation itself. What the Prophet is being given is theologically very different from what the Christian, even those ministers, believe. The Muslims are very adamant about the fact that God does not have a son, for instance. That Jesus is not the Son of God. That he is not divine even though he is a messenger. And actually calling him the Son is an act of blasphemy. It angers God so much so that takadu samawat yatafattarna. The heavens are about to split every time someone claims God has a son. That is how far apart the Christian and the Muslim are on the view of the divinity of Christ. They couldn't be further apart. And yet, those words that apparently anger God have already been sent down, they've already been recited, and they continue to pray to Jesus, calling on his name in the mosque of the Prophet under his own supervision, because he understands that anger that may come from God, that he doesn't approve of what's happening here, is for him to judge, not people to judge, including the messenger, including the Prophet himself. How we deal with each other is a separate set of policies, and how God will deal with us on Judgment Day is a separate conversation altogether. Now, I wanted to give you a little bit of that background. Now, I'm going to take a step back and give you another story and get to the verses that I started with, inshallah. And my hope is for the Muslims in the audience and the non-Muslims that we take away something new. I honestly feel today when I hear discourse about Islam, even in certain pseudo-academic circles, when the Quran is being quoted, when verses of it are being quoted, that the level of the level of shallow analysis and the lack of even a little bit of depth in looking into what has been said and how this stuff was practiced for centuries at a time is just completely overlooked. It's so grossly misrepresented, it's offensive. And sometimes you hear something so ridiculously absurd, you don't even know where to begin. You don't even know where to begin to answer this, you know? And so, I mean, we get stunned by just how stupid this person is who claims to be a professor sometimes. You know? And that, I know that sounds offensive, but that's what it is. So I'm hoping to share a little bit of a story with you today of the story of Islam culminating with some of the last revelations that we believe were sent to our Prophet, meaning some of the last revealed chapters of the Quran. You would imagine what that's important because these are parting words. This is now going to be the mindset with which the Muslims are going to engage with the rest of the world, right? And according to many, what is given at the end is basically, if there was anything to the contrary before, it overrides it. Because these are the final words. This is the last installation of revelation, right? So here it goes. When Islam starts, this man, Muhammad, is at the age of 40. He's a well-known community figure. He's a businessman. People respect him. They also really respect the family that he comes from. They also respect the fact that he's been a dignified, honest, reliable person in otherwise a pretty cutthroat community. So people leave their belongings with him and they entrust him with it. When they have a dispute, they'll come to him. This is before he claims any revelation or claims any claim to prophethood or anything like that. At the age of 40, our belief is that he came into contact with the angel Gabriel, who started giving revelation to him. And he was quiet about it at first. He only shared this truth with his own spouse, who supported him. And later on, and actually one of the first people his spouse took him to was a Christian scribe. And because she had heard something about this name Gabriel or angel before, so she took him to her, a relative of hers who happened to be a Christian scribe in the city of Mecca, who said this is the same one that God has been sending to prophets all along. And beware, your people are going to shun you out, because that's always happened. So he gave him this warning soon after he died. But anyway, this is where Islam begins. Early on, it seemed when he makes the claim to be a prophet and receive revelation, he's claimed to have lost his mind. He was such a smart fellow. He had such good potential. We wonder what's happened to him. He claims an angel speaks to him and God speaks to him. And he speaks on behalf of him. And he's telling us to leave all of our traditional idols and let them go and worship only one God that we can't even see. All of this seemed strange to that community. And so first it was claimed that he's insane. Then it was claimed that maybe he's not so insane. Maybe he's got a dubious agenda. Maybe he just wants to take over the city. Maybe he wants government. And as a result, he's just creating this cult, and if he has enough of a cult following, he's just going to take over. So he was accused of being a liar. When they couldn't come up with a response to some of the incredible language of the Quran, he was claimed to be a magician or a poet. And so these allegations came one after the other, none of which would deter him or his followers, who remained completely passive, peaceful, and non-aggressive. Actually, the policy in the Quran was kufu aydiyakum, hold your hands back. In other words, if they're going to hit you, don't hit back. Turn the other cheek, quite literally. That was the policy. And that is the policy for when these 10 or so years, when 2/3 of the Quran is revealed. 2/3 of the Quran is revealed in that context. Until it gets to a point where these people say this nuisance is growing, and our ridicule of these people, our torture of these people, our attempts to completely, disfigure their name in public, none of this has worked. So we need to take matters in our own hand. And because they were tribal people, you have to understand how tribes worked back in the day. If you belong to a particular Arab tribe, you cannot kill one of your own. You can't do so. Because that would mean you have no honor. And if you are willing to kill one of your own, then you are basically open game for the rest of the tribes. Because they'll think that you have an internal conflict. So even though he belonged to one of the Meccan tribes, they couldn't openly kill him. Or they couldn't openly take him out. That would have been a big political problem for them. So they created a conglomerate of groups that would actually secretly try to assassinate him. Members of different tribes would come together, cloak themselves, and try to take care of business. That attempt obviously failed, and the Prophet is given revelation ahead of time. He escapes to a city that offers him safe haven. And this city is the city of Medina. This is where the funding is. Because once he moves to this city, there's a significant Jewish population, and there's a significant Christian population already living in that city. And they actually coexist. All three of these groups now coexist. And the nature of revelation, this is the last third of the Quran now, revelation-wise. 2/3 has already come down. This last third is now teaching the Muslims how to live themselves as a newly free community, how to establish their mosque, what regulations they should follow, and more importantly, how should they be engaging with what the Quran calls the people of the book. This is actually the Quran's term for Jews and Christians, those two communities, the people of the book. That's the term that's used for them. Or another phrase that's used in the Quran is those who were given the book. Those who were given the book. These are two terms for those two communities. And now engagement with them begins. And it goes on for some time. In the meantime, the other city that we've just left, Makkah, isn't happy. And they want to see this Islam thing annihilated completely and this community destroyed. So over the course of the next decade or so, there are several battles. One in which the entire city of Medina was almost completely surrounded, and they didn't want to discriminate between any man, Muslim woman, and child, even anybody else inside the city. They were ready to kill every civilian inside. That's how bad things got between these two cities. But I'm fast forwarding this incredible 23-year history, this 23-year span, and I'm getting to the point where finally the Prophet has so many followers and has so much momentum behind him that they decide that they're going to march back into the city of Makkah unarmed, with, literally thousands upon thousands of followers, and perform pilgrimage and fulfill the rites of worship at the house we believe was built by Abraham. And they walk in so much overwhelming number that the Meccans literally surrender. And now these are people that have killed family members of Muslims, they've engaged in war with them, and now you've already taken over their city, and all of these war criminals have now been brought before you, and the Prophet is about to address them, and he says, "La tathriba alaykum al-yawm." Actually, he said more than that. I'll translate it for you. He said, "I will say to you today what my brother Joseph said to his siblings. No harm shall fall upon you today. You forgive all." That was the final verdict that he passed on these people that engaged in war with him for well over a decade and tortured him for a decade before that. Now, this is about the culminating phase of the career of the Prophet. He's got maybe 1 or 2 years left on this earth, and now he's giving the Muslim community advice on how to engage thereafter. The verses you heard recited are very interesting. They were revealed in that time, about the end of the career of the Prophet. You'll notice in those verses, Allah said, the 11 to 13 of chapter 49, 11 and 12 began, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, those of you who believe. Meaning the address was to the Muslim community. You shouldn't backbite one another, don't talk behind each other's back, don't have suspicion, don't make fun of each other. Those kinds of things. The ethics of engagement with each other. But you'll notice the 13th verse actually changed tone and said, Ya ayyuhan nas, people, all people, we have created you from male and female, and have made you into people, nations. I'll get to that word in a second. In the Arabic language, a really peculiar word. Nations and tribes, so you may get to know one another. The Muslims were already being told that they have to take this message, that all human beings are created equal, and that people should get to know one another. This is the message that they should carry out on behalf of God. Not to convert anybody, but actually just to share. Share that humanity is one equal standing before God. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. Interesting word I was going to tell you about the word nations in the Arabic language used in the Quran. Unique word, shu'ub. Sha'b in Arabic actually means a crack in a wall. And the Arabic language is weird like that. It'll actually give you a physical image and make you think about an abstract thing. Like the idea of a nation is compared to a crack in the wall. What does that have to do with the nation? What it has to do with is the fact that a wall is almost entirely perfect except this little thing that needs to be filled in. And the idea behind shu'ub is that people have amazing values. Like the Chinese culture, the Mandarin culture is incredible. The Malay culture is incredible. The Somali culture is incredible. But they have certain things they can learn from another culture to fill in their gaps. No nation is perfect. So as you travel and get to know one another, you'll learn practices, traditions, you'll learn trade secrets, you learn things that you wouldn't have learned among your own people, and they will actually help you cover your own flaws. Like no human being is perfect, no nation is perfect. And as a matter of fact, God wanted it this way. So no one nation would have perfection. So they would actually have to be forced to engage, they would have to engage with each other to fill in each other's flaws. And then, as a result of that, by the way, when this verse was revealed, up until now, the Arabs were an incredibly racist people. I mean, their tribe is superior to the next tribe over. You couldn't tell the difference, but these guys are basically monkeys. They're not even human. That's how they looked at it. And for non-Arabs, forget it. They would call them ajam, which means actually people with a speech impediment. That's what they would call them. I mean, they were incredibly racist people. And yet, in this verse, one of the things that you would imagine are the basis of one human being claiming supremacy over another. It could be race, it could be language, it could be economic status, it could be political status, it could be the nation. Nowadays, it's the nation state. One could be proud of their country. We could make fun of Canadians just as well, I mean, I do when I go there. But maybe I'm too close to the border. I shouldn't be saying this. But anyway, all of that's been taken out of the picture. Anything you might think would give you a kind of supremacy has been removed from the equation. I only make these differences among you, God is saying now, so you can just get to know one another, learn each other's customs, learn each other's norms, and that's what I want. That's what I'd like to see. But I want to take it a few steps further here. Again, the Muslims have just conquered the region of Arabia. They've settled. Now they have a government in place. They're about to engage, and Muslim convoys are already traveling as far as China, India. Some of them are already engaged in trade with the Roman Empire, the Persian empires at the time. So these Muslims are now spreading all over the globe. What policy are they going to take with them? Domination, as Fox News will tell you? Let's hear what the Quran has to say. So this is, again, last revelations. You would think the final revelation should have a lot of military injunctions. Now that you have an empire, you shall grow this empire and make it into a global dominating force, etc., etc. Listen to this. Allah said, it's absolutely fascinating, I find it. الْيَوْمَ أُحِلَّ لَكُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ Today, good and pure things have been made permissible for you. وَطَعَامُ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حِلٌّ لَكُمْ And the food of those who were given the book before you. The food of those who were given the book before you is completely permissible for you. What in the world? Who are the people of the book? Can you guys remind me? I don't remember. I talk a lot. You're a Christian? So the food of the Jewish and the Christian communities is completely permissible for who? For you people, for Muslims. This is one of the last revelations. They didn't have McDonald's back then. It's hard to believe, but they didn't have it. They didn't have the restaurant industry. You know what they had? You know where you ate? You ate at people's homes. You ate at people's homes. When God says their food has been made permissible for you, He's actually opening the door for you. If they invite you to their home, don't treat it with suspicion. Go and break bread with them. Eat with them. Eat with them. But then, one half of the suspicion remains. Well, if they invite me, I'll go. But what if they want to come over? وَطَعَامُكُمْ حِلٌّ لَهُمْ And your food is completely permissible for them. If this was just about dietary restrictions, you don't have to say, you can give them your food too. You'd only say, you can eat their food. But He made it both ways. Why? So we go into each other's homes. So we become actual neighbors. So we break bread together. This was actually already foreseen, particularly with the Muslim community engaging with the people of the book. Particularly with them. And then on top of that, this is the same verse, it's not even done yet. He says, وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ Not only has that been made permissible to you, but dignified women that come from good families, from within the Muslim believing community, and dignified women from among the people of the book, you may also marry, you may intermarry. Because when you're going to break bread, you're going to get to know each other. When people get to know each other, some of them start liking each other. Then they get married and stuff. And it's okay. It's incredible that this is one of the last revelations in the Quran. Engage with these people. And now take a step back. This is actually with the people of the world. The narrative that somehow Islam is at war with Christianity or Judaism is silly. It's silly. One of my Arabic teachers, I'm an Arabic student. I'm not an Arab, I'm a student of the Arabic language. By the way, a round of applause for the mayor, please. One of my teachers, really fascinating fellow, I'm a student of the Arabic language as much as I am a teacher. He's originally Palestinian, and he's in his 70s now. And when we hear Palestinian, you're thinking now, wait, Israeli conflict, this picture comes in our head because of what we've seen all this time. This fellow, we're sitting together, we're talking one day, And we were reading some passages of the Quran, and he just had a recollection of his days when he was living back he lived in Jerusalem. And he says, I was maybe 19 years old, and my best friend, one of them was Christian and the other one was Jewish. And we used to sit together, we used to play chess, we used to talk, and then you'd hear the bell ring, and the Christian would go. And he'd go pray. And you'd hear the adhan, you'd hear the call of Muslim prayer, and the Muslim would go. And then it would be time for the Jewish friend to go pray, and he would go. And we'd take our prayer breaks, and we'd come back and hang out again. And that was life. And that wasn't centuries ago, he's still alive. Hard to imagine, huh? I hear this and I go, no, come on. You have a video of this? Well, didn't have cameras very complicated. So, but the narrative that's been fed to us, and the narrative that you might even assume is the common default kind of engagement between Muslims and non-Muslims is entirely false. It's not even true to the spirit of the Quran itself. It's not even true to the spirit of the Quran. I want to share some things with you about this last surah, this last major chapter that was revealed. It's the 5th chapter, by the way. If you're curious, you can read it yourselves. I'll share some things with you from it. Allah says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. I love it. As you're going to engage with it, he says, had God wanted, he would have made you all into one nation. Now think about that. Had he wanted, he would have converted all of you into one single nation. That's not what he wanted. And then he says, and this is actually right after the verses of what the Jews were given in Revelation, the Torah that was given to them, and exalting the Torah that was given to them. Anyway, وَلَكِنْ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ فِيمَا آتَاكُمْ. But he made you into different nations so that he may test you in whatever he's given you. فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Then compete with each other in outdoing each other in good things. Compete with each other in doing good things. إِلَى اللَّهِ مَرْجِعُكُمْ جَمِيعًا. To God alone is your final return altogether. فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ فِيهِ تَخْتَلِفُونَ. He's the one who's going to tell you the things you used to disagree about. He will tell you about that. You don't have to worry about that here. Here you compete in doing good things. Here's what you do. I live in Texas. I'm sorry. But I live in Dallas, and we had an interfaith program at our mosque. This is actually, it's a beautiful community, relatively a very small community compared to the Muslim community out in Texas. You'd be surprised. Our Friday congregation exceeds 2,000 people, and we have multiple shifts, right? So, and the churches. I mean, seriously, the churches. They have to, for some of the churches, they can't even fill the congregation in church. They have to rent the local basketball stadium and fill those in. It's incredible. And it's something actually personally I admire. But anyway, so one of the local ministers, he came to our mosque and he said, look, as far as I'm concerned, y'all are wrong. And as far as y'all are concerned, I'm wrong. But that's okay, we can still help people in the neighborhood. I love it. I absolutely love it. It's okay. We can disagree with each other. One of my close friends is a rabbi. We couldn't disagree with each other more, let me tell you. We could not disagree. I mean, we have some interesting, passive-aggressive conversation about, in a kosher restaurant sitting in Dallas, Texas. I mean, it sounds like a bad joke, but that's what we do. But we'll talk about, Abraham and Moses and how we see him so differently than they do, and it's okay. It's still good pizza. It's still engaging good conversation. That doesn't mean we all have to agree. It doesn't. We're not going to, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. If God wanted, he would have made you into one nation. He's going to tell you about the differences you're going to have. Look, Muslims are not going anywhere. And if Muslims here are delusional, somehow we're going to convert everybody on the earth, get over it. That's already been told, it ain't going to happen. That's not going to happen. We better learn to live with each other and not just tolerate each other. I'm offended by that word. To work with each other and cooperate with each other as part of God's grand plan. You don't have to compromise your identity to get along with someone else who doesn't see things your way. I can be proud of being Muslim. I can believe in this to be the word of God as I do. But that doesn't mean I can't have Christian friends and Jewish friends. And then some of you would like to quote verses from the Quran that say, and then this is in the same surah, interestingly enough, same surah, don't, listen to this, it's going to sound politically incorrect. Don't take the Jews and Christians as your friends. They're only friends to each other. It's here, it's in the surah. I can point the verse out to you so you can quote it later. We make a poster out of it and put it outside. Allah explains on it. First, He sends you a shot. Don't take them as friends. Wait, what? You just said I can eat with them. You just said I can marry them. I can't even, so I can't be friends with my wife? How does this work? Just a couple of verses later, He elaborates Himself. That's part of the condition of the Quran. He forces you to read on so you can understand. You can't take anything in isolation and understand it. Same chapter, a couple of verses later, among them, those who have made a mockery of your faith, those who have ridiculed your message, those who defy God and show defiance to Him in speech and in action, don't take them as friends and don't expect protection from them. So He'll qualify. It's not an open policy. There are some people that are defiant, they're aggressive, they're hateful, and they're spiteful. Don't be delusional and say, now it's not time to turn the other cheek. Just be careful from these people. He doesn't even say, don't make them your enemy. He doesn't say that. He says, don't be gullible and be their friend. The Quran just doesn't want you to be gullible. That's all. So this was there. It's these statements, if you want to take them in isolation, yes, they do sound offensive. But put in context, they couldn't make more sense. They're completely sensible conversation. And this is something the Ummah, the Muslim nation, carried with pride. I mean, I urge you to make a good study of the history of Andalusia in Spain. And how the Muslims engaged with the Jewish and Christian communities in Spain. And how they all flourished together. They literally flourished together. Even their intellectual and spiritual traditions cooperated with each other. Muslim scholars of the Quran would literally sit with rabbis and ask them about the stories in the Quran from the biblical perspective and put them in their notes. That kind of conversation used to happen. That kind of cooperation used to exist. And it can be brought back. And if we're expecting, and this is my own anecdotal thing, you don't have to accept what I'm saying. Actually, one more thing. Particularly, I'll say one thing about the Christian people and one about the Jewish people. Same surah again. وَلْيَحْكُمْ أَهْلُ الْإِنْجِيلِ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. I love it. The people of the gospel should judge by what God revealed to them. He's encouraging them to live by their law. The Muslim scripture is telling the people of the gospel to judge by the revelation given to them. He says about the Torah, he says, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا التَّوْرَاةَ فِيهَا هُدًى وَنُورٌ. We were the ones who sent down the Torah. In it there is light. In it there is guidance. فِيهَا هُدًى وَنُورٌ. SubhanAllah. This is not early revelation, this is by the end. So that when the Muslim goes to the Roman Empire, when the Muslim travels to far-off lands, and he meets people of other faiths, he can recite this to them. But the Quran is not dismissing the goodness in their faith. It's not. Yes, we have very strong theological disagreements. Absolutely. Absolutely. But what will happen to the people on the Day of Judgment is not up to you or to me. That is a decision God will make. I will hold on to my convictions. I will not say, oh, you know what? We're all going to go to heaven. Or we're all, this group is going to go to heaven, that group's going to... Muslims, we're not even allowed to say that. We're not even allowed... We can't even say it about ourselves. We're not allowed to say that. And for some people to trap people, well, so do you think everybody else is going to hell? Well, actually, I don't think about that. Because it's a little above my pay grade. I just think about what's for dinner. Why do I have to think about what's going to happen? Let me just do something good here. What am I going to get out of passing judgment on other people? What am I going to get out of that? It's a pointless conversation that only brews hatred and suspicion. It's something that God Himself discouraged in His book. So these couple of things I quickly wanted to tell you, and then just my own personal anecdotes about what's going on in the political sphere. I personally think what's happening in the political sphere can be rendered irrelevant if and only if, at a local level, we break down barriers of communication. If and only if the Muslim community here, can take the spirit of the Quran and break bread with their neighbors. And I'm not even asking our guests to break bread with us, because that means that we have to order the food and pay for it and stuff. I'm telling the Muslim community, we need to be far more inviting. And not to preach anything, just to chat, just to do good. If there's an unemployment problem growing in the community, we should be dealing with it together. If there are people that have not been able to make their payments in their homes and they're buried under debt, it doesn't matter what faith they're in. We should be dealing with that. That's competing in good things. That's cooperating in good things. That's something we can all do together. It doesn't matter what label is done. It doesn't have to be the mosque's logo or the church's logo. And this organization gets the credit for this voluntary task. It's just good work. It doesn't matter what label it's done under. We shouldn't be obsessed with our logos and our image. It shouldn't be a PR stunt. It should just be done because it's the right thing to do. That's all. That's needed, you know? And it's something that's very easy to do. And if we can do that, I can tell you, you know, with all the negative stories on one side, on the one hand, you know, just a few inspirational stories of cooperation can change the landscape. They really can. They really can. And we have an opportunity to do so. This is a tiny, tiny community, and I'm so proud of you guys for putting this program together. I actually, honestly, only came here because I thought there's free food. But in all seriousness, just a little bit about, you know, what I try to do and, you know, what I've been working on. I'm a student of the Quran. I study it most of my time. I used to teach the Arabic language. I'm head of a small institution that's grown quite a bit, actually, over the years. But I've transitioned out of teaching Arabic into Quran research and Quran study. And part of that, not all of it, but part of that is the comparative study between Quran and previous scripture. So I do quite a bit of that as well. So that's the area that I'm involved in. My project to actually do an analysis of the entire Quran from a literary point of view and also from a Judeo-Christian point of view as well, together comprehensively, is probably a decade from being done. So I'm only just getting started. So I'm asking the Muslim community here, especially to make dua that our project of tafsir of Quran is complete, bi'idhnillah, and that Allah gives me tawfiq to not only do that in video form, in lecture form, but also publish, so that we have a resource on this kind of thing, inshallah. And so those are just a few thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I'd actually much rather hear from yourselves. Please don't ask me hard questions. Thank you again for listening. You're going to get a very different picture. So it's actually not even the average. I wouldn't even be able to simplify what the average Muslim thinks of the term secularism. I can tell you, however, that secularism, for example, in our esteemed mayor was there in Turkey not too long ago. Secularism in Turkey actually meant the banning of any religious practice. Right? So the way we think of secularism in America is not how they think. And if a Turkish American hears the word secularism, and there are Turkish Americans, what they ascribe secularism to is very different. Like here in the United States, it's associated with religious freedom. That is not the case in other nations where they claim secularism. There are extreme forms of secularism, where religious practices are completely repressed, where people are forbidden from going into a mosque even to pray. You know, because in the name of secularism. So, you know, sometimes these terms are not given their due. As far as in the American context, let's talk about that. In the American context, the ability to practice our faith and the ability to live, you know, proudly as Americans and as Muslims is something that I believe across the board, the average American Muslim takes as a blessing. And as a matter of fact, a good number of them came from places in the world where they weren't even able to practice their own faith, given that they belong to one school of thought or another, and they've escaped, you know, one kind of oppression or another in the name of religion. You know, so that is something actually we appreciate. But again, loaded terms. If you define it in the American way, then yeah, it's a thing to appreciate. But if you don't, and you leave it open-ended, then literally every Muslim or every citizen of the world, depending on what part of the world they came from, will have their own definition. And that's been my experience as I've traveled. I'm very careful about these words now, because they just mean so much different, there's so much difference between them, two different people. Okay.
Thank you.
There's a hand back there.
Most of us here do believe in getting along.
Can you hand that gentleman a mic? I really want to hear what he has to say.
Can you hear me?
No, I can't. Mike's coming.
Hello?
Hi.
I would assume most people here came here because they do believe in getting along. Certainly I'm not a Muslim, I'm here. My question is this. I asked a number of students at the university here to recognize what their faith is, whether they're Shia or Sunni, Sufi, whatever. And a number of them are Shia, particularly our last lab partner was a Shia. And he doesn't come to this mosque. My question would be this. Are there Shia here? Are sects that are here, are they welcome here? That would be my question.
Sure.
And excuse me, I don't have a mic, but I have a follow-up question right on that I just came into the room that
You are so incredibly,
most
your projection is amazing. You don't even need mic. Go ahead.
ever get together and love Allah.
Say that again?
Will the Sunni Shia faction ever get together with Muslims and love Allah?
Sure. I'm optimistic about that.
And Allah.
Yeah, so let me answer that maybe with a little bit of context and nuance, hopefully. Religious practices vary, and that's not just something unique to the Muslim tradition. Of course, it's unique to the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition as well, right? If you travel, for example, I've traveled quite extensively across the U.S. If you go to a place like Little Rock, Arkansas, I believe it has the most variation of denominations of Christianity per square mile. So the number of variations of the churches are quite many. That doesn't mean these people hate each other, but it certainly means that they have.
I'm saying, will they put down their weapons? And
There
love
are no weapons in
Allah?
Maine, relax.
No.
I can't. And let's understand something. Much of the conflict that is, this theological disagreement is one thing, but political games are another. And what's happening between, certain states in the Gulf and in much of the Muslim world is a political war where religion is being used as a proxy for that war. And if you don't realize that, then you're just not looking at geopolitics carefully enough, right? So it's not like some Shia, family living in Maine has a problem with a Sunni family. They actually might even get along just fine, despite their disagreements. What I just told you is, I can get along with someone who believes God has a son, and I don't. And my God is offended by the idea. And I can still get along with them and eat break bread with them according to my God. How will I actually have hatred or spite towards someone who actually believes in the same prophet that I do, and believes in the same book that I do, with some variation? It doesn't make any sense. So in the actual spirit of the text, there isn't supposed to be this kind of hatred. Of course, it's to me personally, this is a departure from the spirit of the text that has brought us here. Now, the last thing I'll say about this, about religious disagreement and conflict, internal conflict and interreligious conflict. I personally believe this is only a matter of all motivations other than God. Like nobody hates anybody else because they love God. They don't. You can't. That's not how it works. It is it's rooted either in pride, arrogance, a sense of supremacy, domination, pure hatred and spite. These are the things that drive that kind of rhetoric. And religion just gets rolled up in the conversation, But I certainly don't feel that way. For myself personally, I'll tell you, I speak in England, for instance. I was giving a lecture in Birmingham, not Alabama, Birmingham, and I was speaking there, and a group of people came up to me and said, "We're Shia, we're here. Please don't tell anyone." And I was like, "Okay, I won't tell anyone, but I'm really happy you're here." And a group of Christians came and said, "We're at this Muslim event, but we didn't tell anyone we're Christian." I was like, "It's fine, guys, hang out. Let's put samosas at the end. It's cool." You don't have to be, and we can engage, we can re-engage in civil conversation. The other thing I'll say is, the disagreements we've had for over 1,000 years aren't going away anytime soon. It's okay, we can live with that. It's okay. We don't have to convert everybody to our way of thinking. Human beings weren't designed that way. We vary. We always have, we always will. But that doesn't mean we can't get along. Anyway.
Assalamu alaikum, brother Nouman. Jazakallah khairan for attending this event. I would just like to respond to this gentleman's question. Yes,
But he
Sufism.
he didn't ask you. Okay, go ahead.
I appreciate that,
Okay.
but I'm a member of the community and
Okay.
I understand the local
Gotcha.
the way
Gotcha.
things work here. And I would just like to say yes, Shia, Sufi, no matter what people practice, are welcome to this mosque. And we do not ask their religious background, we do not ask their
Thank you.
So I'd just like to respond to that. And we do have Shia in the audience. They won't, I will not put you in the spot. Put up your hand. We do have people from different backgrounds and we do not ask that question. have people who have come here from different practices come here and pray. So everybody's welcome. And if you have students who are concerned about that, tell them that they're welcome. We will not question them. We will not turn them away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to read a written question if you guys don't have. I like listening to questions more though. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about poor understanding and not a good translation of the
Yeah,
Quran?
yeah,
How do
yeah.
you think you can overcome it, or whether or not to be taught in English?
Okay, so how can the problem of poor translation and miscommunication be overcome? There is a real drought in good literature on Islam by Muslims. You'll find, like if you Google Islam or go to a bookshelf and try to find literature on the Quran and stuff like that, in English at least, our American bookshelves are mostly filled by people that don't represent the faith. I mean, imagine Christianity being talked about only from a Muslim perspective. Like, that's what's happening with Islam at this time, right? So it is a problem. There are a couple of translations I do recommend. I'll mention them for you, so you can look them up. At the top of that list is actually Professor Abdul Halim, Oxford University Press. You can find the Oxford translation of the Quran, Abdel, Abdel Halim. And maybe those of you that are signed up for this program or something, they can email that. I'm working on a 2-layer video translation of the Quran. So I've done one already, like a guided walkthrough of the entire Quran. I've done that already and it's been recorded, and it's online. It's on my institution's website on radio. And then now I'm doing a detailed literary analysis of the Quran. And I'm hoping that both of those things turn into book form as well, because I do see that as a major gap. Okay. You quoted verse. Okay, maybe the person who asked about the use of we for God, maybe we can talk after the program because it's a little bit off topic from here. Okay, so what do we call the worship or religion of Muhammad in his childhood? We still call it Islam. We call it Din al-Fitra. The Quran claims that Islam, which means subservience and submission to God's will, and being inclined to follow God's commandments, and being inclined to obey and please Him, is actually naturally the predisposed position of all human beings. We're born into that. So everybody has Islam. As a matter of fact, the children of Israel, according to the Quran, had Islam. That's what Jacob passed on to them at his deathbed. And they said to him, وَنَحْنُ لَهُ مُسْلِمُونَ, we're only going to be in submission to God. To God. And then the Arabic word for that is Muslim. Right? So the term is used for even Christians who came and heard some verses of the Quran and started crying. You'll see their eyes roll with tears, and they'll say later on in another passage, we used to be Muslim all along, we just didn't know. Right? So we'll use those words. So it's not a word used to describe one particular religion. It is after this revelation, but it's actually the term used to describe any sincere who submit themselves to God. So that would be the answer to that. How do you bring back ISIS or similar such groups to the spirit of the Quran? You want to talk to them? They're crazy. These are lunatics. They're criminals, and they're satanic as far as I'm concerned, and they're not interested in conversation. If you can tell, they've killed more Muslims than anybody else. So these are beyond reason. These people. And extremism, again, just like disagreements have always existed, extremism and fanaticism across religious traditions has always existed. And to define a religion by its extremist factions has always been an unfair way to mark an entire group of people. Right? And it is a crisis. I'm not looking, look, as far as, I had a chance to meet with the president some time ago on this issue before he gave his speech on countering violent extremism. I have my own view on the subject. And here's, in a nutshell, my view. Extremism in the Muslim world is a product of geopolitical conflicts. There are grievances, there are very real grievances that have led to very serious downturn and actually declining situations for people. They're surviving off of scraps. They have very bad, there's no jobs for young people. They're frustrated, they're angry. There are lots of reasons that culminate and lead to extremism. But one of those many reasons is a manipulation of religion. It's not the only reason, but it's one of them, right? And so, for me, I see one of our responsibilities as a Muslim community is to actually fix the discourse and clarify the discourse on our own tradition so that our religion can't be taken for a ride. But even, no matter how much we do that, there are always going to be people who are not interested in conversation. The decision to want to kill mindlessly comes first, and the religious justification is a far second. And they're not interested. They have already made up their mind. You see what I'm saying? The insanity is already there. It's just cloaked with something superficially. So you can beat it down and debate it out of their system, but actually that's not going to change, the other part of the problem. So combating this thing is going to be something that all of us have to deal with. And it's something that I pray that we make some headway in.
We have a question from the audience.
Hi. You talked about one of the places where you said Allah said that everyone is equal, and then later on it seems like there is a distinction between people who believe in the book or who are like part of the book. So I was curious to know what the Quran has to say about like other religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, or even perhaps people who do not believe in any religion. Would you break bread with them?
Yeah, I break bread with them. It's the particular kinds of things. The dietary restriction on meats, for example, is there and holds true. So even if, for example, if my Christian friend invited me and they had, some kind of pork, I wouldn't eat that because there are exceptions to what I can and can't eat. Or I wouldn't drink wine. Even if my Jewish and Christian friends did, I wouldn't drink wine. But other things I can eat along with them, right? Now, as far as Muslims dealing with non-Muslims of other faiths other than the Jewish and Christian tradition, that's actually the first engagement of the Quran. The Quran came down in Mecca, which were actually people that worship, they worship many different kinds of gods. They had a plethora of religions that had nothing to do with Christianity or Judaism or Islam, right? And the way they were dealt with is incredible. So for instance, the Quran, its first criticism, when the Muslims started being tortured, one of the reasons they started getting tortured is they were actually calling out millionaires for their scheming business practices. Those who skim people, the shortchange people what they owe them in business. And this was going after the fat cat millionaires for skimming pagans for their money. Like it wasn't about cheating Muslims, it was actually about cheating the citizens of Mecca who don't follow Islam. The Quran came to the aid of the orphan. Not the Muslim orphan, the orphan. Right? As the Quran came to the aid of, the Arabs had a practice, they thought that, a girl, if you gave birth to a girl, then you're not man enough to have a son. That's how they thought. Right? Oh, you had a girl? Oh, something missing in your masculinity. Which is amazing because they were crazy, man. They were just really crazy. It's just, when you read this stuff, I literally stop sometimes. I'm reading a classical Arabic book. I'm reading on you guys are crazy. It's so ridiculous. But you know what they did? The best case scenario, if his wife had a girl, he'd make her a separate tent and never talk to her again, just put food outside. Then she lives in that tent in shame with her daughter. Worst case scenario, he'll bury the daughter alive. These are the two practices they did. There's actually a famous piece of poetry, it's epic. This woman who's been abandoned, she lives in the tent by herself, now it's been a couple of years, because she gave birth to this child. She says, Mali Abi Hamzata la ya'tina, yadhallu fil bayti alladhi yalina. He says, what's wrong with Abu Hamza? The guy's name is Abu Hamza. What's wrong with Abu Hamza? He doesn't come to us. He lives in the house right next door. She says, he's only angry because we didn't have a boy. I swear to God, that wasn't in my hands. And actually, if anyone's to blame, it's you. She goes, we only give birth to what they planted in us. She's like, I didn't do it, you did. But the Quran came and said, the day of judgment will come, and you would think, day of judgment, the believers shall stand and tell the disbelievers that they were wrong all along. He says, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ When the baby girl buried alive shall stand alive again and ask what crime was she killed for. And the Quran came to the defense of the helpless and the needy and the poor and those taken advantage of that were non-Muslims first. It actually didn't even use the phrase, those of you who believe, for 2/3 of the book. It said people, 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 my servants. He didn't use the phrase, those of you who believe. He didn't use that. So it is a universal message. And it does appeal, I believe very strongly, that it honors all humanity. It's one of the most amazing things about the Quran. I'll tell you just how the Quran, for example, dealt with racism. The Quran itself, not history. How the Quran dealt with racism. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We honored the children of Adam. Muslims believe we're all products of Adam and Eve, yeah? And he says we endowed every child of Adam with honor. Which means, to me, a Hindu, a Buddhist, an atheist, a Christian, a Jew, doesn't matter. They are honorable, not because I say so, because God gave them honor. It doesn't matter what economic status they come from, what country they belong to, what passport they carry, what neighborhood they live in, what car they drive or don't drive. You know, they are honored because God honored them. That's enough for me. You know? And then on top of that, one of my favorite verses in the Quran, he says, you know, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ اخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ. Oh, it's so epic. Oof. Sometimes I just read this stuff and go, oh God, so good. He says, out of his miracles and out of his miraculous signs is the differences in your tongues and the colors of your skin. So to God, the color of my skin, differing from yours, is a miracle and a divine gift. So the fact that you're darker or lighter is a divine gift. And for me to mock the skin color or the accent or the dialect, which is hard to not make fun of sometimes, especially if it's Scottish. It's hard. Because I've been there and it was hard. I was okay with Ireland. I was fine, you know. We thought this was going to be 33 people here. It was fine. But the Scots, oh, it was difficult, you know. But you can't make fun of even people's dialects. It's a miraculous gift of God that people in New England talk differently than Texans.
I have a question.
You know? Yes. I could keep ranting forever, yeah.
My question is because, like, growing up, I've always heard that women in Islam are really suppressed. And I guess, like, you know, I mean, I never questioned it. In fact, when my friends told me, you know, they don't feel suppressed, I was just like, oh, they don't know they're being suppressed. Because, you know, it was so, like, I didn't even realize I was so prejudiced in my mind. It was only when I came here, I was traveling, I spoke to many women, I realized that maybe I'm the one who's prejudiced and maybe, you know, I'm the one who does not know. So I wanted to know your opinion on, actually, your, like, I mean, can you tell me what the Quran talks about the equality between men and women?
I can tell you what the Quran says about men and women. I have a bias on the man. So I feel that they've been given too much advantage in the Quran. But I'll share it with you anyway. I have 4 daughters, 3 sisters. I'm surrounded by women. And they've overrun me in my family. But anyway, I'll tell you something. So I'll start with the most controversial part, right? So a common misnomer, the testimony of a woman is worth half of a man. And this comes from a verse in the Quran, at the end of Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah says, فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدُوا رَجُلَيْنِ فَرَجُلٌ وَامْرَأَتَانِ مِمَّنْ تَرْضَوْنَ مِنَ الشُّهَدَاءِ فَإِن لَمْ يَكُونَا رَجُلَيْنِ فَرَجُلٌ وَامْرَأَتَانِ مِمَّنْ تَرْضَوْنَ مِنَ الشُّهَدَاءِ. If you couldn't find 2 men, then find 1 man and 2 women, from whoever you can agree with. That particular statement is actually part of the longest verse of the Quran that talks about loan agreements. And the context of the verse is in Medina, in the city of Medina, very, very few people were literate. Very, very few people. And among them, even the women were even a smaller minority. So now the Quran has introduced that whenever you take a loan, it just can't be word of mouth. You got to write it down. But the problem is when you're going to write it down, you got to find someone who can actually write. Right? So much of the verse talks about people who know how to write have a higher responsibility. They have to show up and they have to help these contracts being made, etc., etc. Now, these contracts are a new thing. And of course, all of us know here that financial contracts, like the ones your bank gives you, are very simple. So the fact that they are complicated, you need, and you know how we have, like in modern society, you have the notary? Or if somebody watching over and sealing and saying this is verifiably the agreement, right? The Quran's injunction was you should have at least 2 witnesses when a contract is being done, right? And in trade, women were actually much less involved back then. And actually, Medina was mostly an agricultural society. Makkah was a more trade society. Medina had agriculture, right? So these are agricultural women. They're not versed in trade to begin with. So what you should do is, if you can find two men, meaning two men versed in trade kind of agreements, at least find two women so they can help each other understand the contract. That's the original context. It's a sociological context of the verse. I'll tell you one more, interestingly enough. Some people claim the Quran says that men have a degree over women. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. Mistranslated, men have a rank above women. The verse is actually talking about divorce. When a man and a woman get divorced, and a man says, I divorce you, she has 3 period cycles in which she's considered in a waiting period. In other words, he can revoke his divorce and say, we're still married. Between that 3-month time period. And he says, God says, within that 3 months, I'm giving the man rights to take you back, to take the woman back. And says, in this context, لِلْمُطَلَّقَاتِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ, actually. For in the case of divorced women, within that 3-month span, he does have an advantage. Allah acknowledges it. I have given the men an advantage for those 3 months for women that are divorced. It wasn't a universal statement about men have an advantage over women. That's never been said. That's actually never been said. Those of you who are familiar with the Arabic language, the ayah begins with al-mutallaqatu yatarabbasna bi anfusihinna. It doesn't begin an-nisa. It begins al-mutallaqat, women that have been divorced. So that's also, a misnomer. As far as standing before God is concerned, in al-muslimina wal-muslimat, wal-mu'minina wal-mu'minat, wal-qanitina wal-qanitat. Oh my goodness. The Muslim men and the Muslim women, the believing men and the believing women, the subservient men, the subservient women, those who guard their chastity among the men and those who do so among the women. All of them have been promised goodness. Like he offers this incredible thing, لا أضيع عمل عامل منكم من ذكر أو أنثى بعضكم من بعض. I will not waste the good deeds of any one of you, male or female. You come from one another. That's his words. You come from one another, And then on top of that, there are the nobility granted to women in the Quran. For example, Muslims don't know this. It's shocking to me, Muslims don't know this. What does taqwa mean, Muslims here? What does taqwa mean? Thank you, Muslims. You made me so proud. I'm out of here. Come on, help me out here. God consciousness. Okay, actually, it doesn't mean God consciousness. It just means consciousness. To be cautious of something, to be astutely aware of something. Now, taqwa is used in the Quran for Allah. Wattaqullah. Have taqwa of Allah. Be cautious and conscious of God. Fine. Wattaqunnar. Be cautious of the fire of hell. Be careful about it. Don't end up there. Wattaqu yawman turja'una fihi ila Allah. Be cautious of a day on which you will be returned to God. Big things, you use the word taqwa. The only other thing taqwa is used for, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامَ أي وَاتَّقُوا الْأَرْحَامَ. Be cautious of the womb of the mother. Be cautious of the relationships that stem from the womb. Be cautious about women. It's an incredible thing that the Quran says. So, the notion that somehow women are at a disadvantage in the Quran, I don't buy it. I certainly don't. The more I've tried to study the subject, I will admit to one thing. There are people within our faith who, despite knowing this, suppress it. Despite knowing this, they suppress it. And they make it sound like that Islam does put women down. I don't agree with that notion. I don't buy it. And I don't want my daughters learning that Islam. I want them to learn the text.
Can we get a question? Can we get a question from the card? The card that was submitted to you.
Oh, the card. Okay, yeah. About halal meat, I can't give you a fatwa. Sorry. I can't give you those. I can point you to someone who can. What is the Quran's perspective on reincarnation? What is the afterlife if this life is just a test? Reincarnation in the sense that you come back as something else is not in the Quran. However, we will be reborn. Death is simply a transition. So we believe that life began way before even this earth. God created all of us all at the same time and asked us unanimously, Adastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And us in our spiritual form all unanimously responded, Bala shahidna, of course we bear witness. Now we were in this, you can call it some kind of cold storage with God. These souls were all sitting there, and then a mother becomes pregnant, a woman becomes pregnant, and a few days into her pregnancy, God commands the angel, some say 120 days according to some narrations, God commands the angel to take one of those souls and deliver it down into the belly of the mother, and thus begins the life inside the womb. Thereafter, the life outside the womb that starts with crying, and there's a lot of crying thereafter too. And so that's the life we're all in right now. Then we experience death, which is actually a passage into the next life. And we don't lose consciousness upon death. We believe that the soul travels back up into the heavens. It is questioned briefly, and it's labeled as either wretched or good, depending on how it lived its life, and is brought back into the body. And as a person lies in their grave, if they were a good person, they experience a breeze from heaven, and if they weren't, they experience a breeze from hell in their grave. And they remain alive in that time. And actually, according to the sayings of the Prophet, these people, the people that are heavenly, can actually visit each other and have a life of their own in the spirit world, in the sense barzakh, the life of barzakh. Thereafter, they are resurrected on Judgment Day. That's when all human beings will be resurrected, and they are brought back. Their body and soul, physically, they're brought back, and they are judged. And thereafter, it's either heaven or hell. And then in the Muslim tradition, hell is unanimously, or heaven rather, is unanimously forever, but there's a disagreement about hell. There's actually historically a disagreement about hell. So some believe it is forever, some look at certain textual evidences in the Quran and say it may not be forever, that it may come to an end. Right? So they're not the same in our tradition. I personally, I'm inclined towards the view that it isn't forever. But again, based on textual inclinations in the Quran.
We have 3 questions in the audience, so we'll start with.
Sure, 3 questions in the audience.
First off, I'd like to thank you for coming. He is a prophet, and Jesus is also recognized as somewhat of a prophet.
Yes, full on prophet.
Given the miracles and the fact that Jesus specifically says he is the Son of God, what is the evidence for why do Muslims believe he is not the Son of God?
Okay, so I'll tell you a few things. We actually believe he never said that. We actually believe quite literally that he never said that. We believe that that was an alteration made later on. And that no prophet ever said it in such words. We also believe that what he truly said has been restored in the Quran. So the Quran will actually say, here's what you keep of what you found in the gospel, and here's what was altered by man later. Right? So that's the Muslim position on it, to be brief. I can point you to some resources of research. I mean, this is more academic, and I don't want this to be a debate about whether or not he's the Son of God. We're not going to solve that here. Right? We're totally not. Let's accept that one. Okay? But if you're interested in the Muslim perspective on the subject, and how we view the Christian texts on it, the biblical texts on it, and what our criticism of those texts is, then I can point you to certain resources. For starters, you can look up a fellow named Gerald Dirks. He's from Colorado, I believe. He's done quite a bit of work on the subject. And you can look up some of his books and videos online as well. Okay.
There are 2 more questions.
I'm going to read one of these. I love this one. Standard question: what is your interpretation of jihad? Okay, so I'm going to go now. Okay, I'll start off with the term hijacking. This term has been hijacked. It's a noble, sacred term. It's a beautiful thing. And it's been turned into something ugly, scary, monstrous, and horrifying. I can tell you, let me tell you, and don't be scared, but I gotta tell you what it is. In its original meaning, no believer can actually have any ounce of faith without jihad. They can't. That's the Quran. إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله أولئك هم الصادقون. True believers are only those who believe in God and His Messenger, and fell into no doubt therein, and then did jihad with their money and themselves in God's path. Those are the true believers. What in the world is jihad? Jihad does not mean to wage war. The Arabic word jihad comes from the Arabic root origin jim, now you can say J, H, and D. Okay, I'll make it simple. Arabic words come from root origins. The word jihad means to struggle. It comes from the meaning of struggle. And the idea is, and I think people of different faith traditions will appreciate this, your faith will always be a struggle. And you're always going to have to struggle against temptation. You're going to have to struggle against yourself. You're going to have to struggle against your own vices. You're going to have to struggle against pressures from the outside society. You're going to have to struggle against sometimes family, sometimes friends. Constant struggle. Now, the extreme form of that struggle could end up being someone trying to take one's life. The extreme form of that struggle could be for the Israelites, for example, to take a stand, against the Philistines or something. That's also jihad, by the way. That is also jihad. But jihad, to assume jihad means war, the Arabic word for war, or war, engaging in warfare, is muharaba. It comes from the Arabic word harb, which actually means war. Or fighting, the Arabic word is qital, which is not the same as jihad. Let me tell you a really interesting place in the Quran. The first time jihad was used in the Quran. Some fun facts. This is Islamic jeopardy. So, first time jihad was introduced to the Muslims in the Quran. This is about 10 years in. The Prophet lives in the hostile city of Mecca, where anybody who claims to become Muslim just gets beat up in the street. They just get beat up. Okay? And one of those followers of the Prophet was a poor man named Khabbab. You don't have to remember his name, but that's okay. I'll just tell you his name anyway. Khabbab. A bunch of gangsters caught a hold of him, found out that he's Muslim. They took his shirt off. They took a bunch of burning coal, and they dropped him on the burning coal with his back on it and stood on it until the skin off of his back melted off. He cried and screamed, and they wouldn't get off of him. And now his back is completely scorched, and they finally get off of him. He comes limping to the Prophet, bleeding and limping to the Prophet, and says, "Why are we going through this? If we believe, if this is the truth, why are we being tortured in this way?" And then came the first passage of Surah number 29 in response to his torture. And part of that passage, mind you, وَمَنْ جَاهَدَ فَإِنَّمَا يُجَاهِدُ لِنَفْسِهِ. One of the first revelations about jihad in the Quran. Whoever does jihad only does so for his own benefit. What more did Khabbab engage in? His patience, his perseverance, him not walking away from his faith, even though he was being tortured. The Quran declared that what? Jihad. That was jihad. Him, standing tall. That was jihad. And he said, and God said that the struggle you did, you only did for your own advantage because you held on to God and didn't let go. That was only for your own self. So there is a context, And the other aspects of jihad, yes, jihad does it refer to fighting in the Quran? Absolutely. But each of those is a story, and what a story each of those is. And we don't contextualize the book. Muslims don't do it either, unfortunately. My recommendation to all the Muslims here, you could read the Quran in translation, but I'm guaranteeing you, you're going to come away with questions. I would urge all of you, Muslims and non-Muslims in the audience that are curious about the subject of jihad, look this person up. His name is Abdul Halim, Abdelhalem. Abdul Halim. He's a professor at the University of London, in London, and he's head of a PhD program in Islamic studies. He's written a remarkable essay on jihad in the Quran. A remarkable, succinct essay any Muslim, non-Muslim can understand. It's very comprehensive, very academically concise, and it's easy consumption, so you should take advantage of that and it'll benefit. Yeah.
Can you add up to this about the psychological benefit from jihad, for people who struggle with their lives, for not to commit suicide, since for people who really in severe problems, in severe conditions of depression or whatever,
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
That's also jihad, and it's very.
Can you please repeat what he said?
Sometimes, one time I was actually traveling, I was in Dubai, and the guy driving the cab, he said, "Man, I don't get to study religion. I'm working 18 hours a day just to provide for my family. I send most of my savings back home, etc., etc. I wish I had time to pray more or to do more, etc. You're so lucky you get to do this stuff. I wish I got a chance to be close to God." I told him, actually, you are close to God. The Prophet told us, "Al-Qasimu Habibullah," the one who works hard is beloved to God. And then the best of you are the best of your family. So the fact that you're doing this to take care of your family makes you the best of us. So you don't have to have religious knowledge or be a scholar of the faith or have studied thousands of pages of text or scripture to be beloved to God. You just have to abide by what, that's why this good news is there in every struggle that people make. So yeah, it does have a broad meaning. It is a beautiful term, and it's really sad what's been done with it. It's really sad. It's very disheartening. Okay, one last one, I mean it.
Can we take two?
Okay, fine.
Two more.
You know, I gotta tell you this story now, because you just did that to me. So I used to teach, what did I used to teach before this? Before I taught human beings, I taught preschoolers. So everything's fine. The day after that, I was like, okay guys, time to open up our books. Guess what the kids did? No, do that thing with your ear. Stand on the table again. I couldn't get them under control for nothing, because now at this point, I'm officially a joker, and I'm not a teacher. Right? I'm not. And so I decided I'm going to be this authoritative. They're going to hear it from me. I said, no more talking. And I thought that's going to work. I think they're going to understand who's the boss in the classroom. Kid in the first row. Can I go to the bathroom? That was the end of it. That was I can't do this. But anyway, yes, 2 questions.
Yes. First, thank you for a really positive message that is so desperately needed today. And I think everyone appreciates that. And I wanted to ask you about how you regard 2 approaches to the Quran or to any scripture. Okay? One is that, let's say, the Quran is the perfect divine revelation, right, of Allah, who has a faith position, is the higher authority, who's revealed to us this perfect scripture.
Sure.
And in that regard, I think what you did was really important, to cite passages from the Quran to try to dispel the distortions, the stereotypes, the misuse. All of that, I think, is really important. The second view, though, would say the Quran is, in a way, a limited text. It has to be contextualized in a developmental view. It's part of a process of development, where it's not just some set, decontextualized text, that even in the 7th century, we're dealing with limited human beings, language, how they expressed, how they understood, how they spread the message.
Sure.
So that tonight, how we read the Quran, what it means to us, what we privilege, what we ignore, how we apply it, or every word that you said tonight about the Quran, we're filtering this through our developmental context, our languages, our religions, right, our cultural, social, economic, gender, class, all of these things go into, so that in a way this is a view of the Quran that we're engaged actively in trying to purify, to spread that message. How does that speak to us today in the world we live today?
Brilliantly put. Thank you so much. That is something I've struggled with for a long time. And I have some of my own conclusions I'd like to share with you. First and foremost, I do believe the Quran to be the perfect scripture. I do. And I do believe it to be divine word for word. That might seem extreme to some of you, but actually pretty much all Muslims in the room feel the same way. It is a divine perfect word of God. However, I do make a very clear distinction between what is termed in philosophy the mind of God and our mind. The word of God may be perfect, but my contemplations and my attempt to understand it and make sense of it is limited, right? And there are limitations I have to understand. It is at the same time universally relevant, that's what I believe, but at the same time highly, highly dependent on original context. The verses I shared with you, I would not have shared with you if I didn't exhaustively try to study their original context first. I believe that doing historical due diligence with the text, linguistically speaking, historically speaking, culturally speaking, first and foremost, before you draw universal conclusions, is absolutely paramount. It's absolutely important. You can't do so without it, right? So, okay, this is said in the Quran. When was this said? How was the reaction to this originally? what do these words actually mean? I mean, we've translated it this way, but linguistically, does that really add up? You know, to ask the hard questions of the text before we try to extrapolate its universal value, it's actually to find the balance between both of those things that you've said. I personally don't take one as opposed to the other. To me, the book is divine, and at the same time, the book merits and it necessitates an exhaustive contemplation and study before you extract conclusions. I mean, that's just, I feel like that's what it deserves. At the very least, that's what it deserves. And to me, one of the most amazing things about the Quran, you would think the more someone believes that this is the Word of God, that they wouldn't question it ever, right? That's not the case. The case is, because we believe it's the Word of God, we actually ask more questions of it. We're actually asked not to learn, we're asked to think in the Quran. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ لَا أَفَلَا تَعْلَمُونَ وَتَتَعَلَّمُونَ. You're not told, don't you know, don't you know, don't you learn. No, we're told, don't you think, don't you contemplate, don't you ponder, don't you reflect. One of my favorite stories in the Quran about, being, on the one hand, you're religiously, committed. And on the other hand, you are constantly asking questions. You're not in a defying kind of way, but you're asking questions. So if somebody says, this is what the book means, I have the right to say, where did you get that from? How do you know it means that? On what basis? Is it on a linguistic basis? Is it on a historical basis? Is it on a textual basis? I have the right to ask those questions, and I must. One of my favorite passages, I'll sum it up to you. The creation story of Adam in the Quran, right? The creation story says that God said that He's going to create someone who He will leave on the earth generation after generation. He's referring to Adam. Angels, in turn back to God and say, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا وَيُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Are you really going to put in there someone who is going to cause a great deal of corruption and spill blood? The angels are worried that once Adam and his progeny spread on the earth, they're going to make a lot of trouble and they're going to spill blood. Now, before I even tell you what happens next, because that's not what I'm here to tell you, what I want to tell you is, angels just questioned who? Angels, who the Muslims believe, in the Quran, the Muslims believe, لَا يَعْصُونَ اللَّهَ مَا أَمَرَهُم. They don't disobey God in whatever He commands them. وَبِأَمْرِهِ يَفْعَلُونَ. They do whatever He commands them to do. وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ التَّحْرِيمِ. They do what they're told. This is angels. Angels are the highest example of absolute obedience to God. And yet those same angels just ask God, this whole Adam thing on the earth doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, Lord. I don't know, it looks like there's going to be some trouble in the hood. You know what we learned from that? We learned that asking God questions when you don't understand is not defiance. It's not defiance. You're supposed to ask questions. And he's going to say, I know what you know. You'll say soon. And He explained it to them. He did. That's what He does. That's why He says, so they ponder deeply into His verses, into His revelations. They think about His revelations. Yes, I will think about it in my weird context. I will think about it in the context in which my childhood was spent in different parts of the world, and I went to high school in New York, and I'm living in Texas now. And that's my context. And in that context, I will engage the Quran as best as I can. And someone who engaged that same book 7 centuries ago, or 10 centuries ago, or 14 centuries ago, is going to only be able to see this from the context in which they lived. That's going to be the case. But that is the beauty of this text, is that constant engagement. And that's why new things will come forth, and new discovery will come out of this text, and new wisdom will come out of this text across the generations. That's what we believe. Okay, last one.
The last question.
Congratulations, by the way.
I appreciate your positive message as well, and I have to say I'm really thrilled with it, especially in the context of all the negative press that there is. And press is usually negative about anything in the world. That's what makes headlines. So there's so much negative press about what's going on in the Middle East and the Islamic world. It's not just the terrorists, who you say, of course, are crazy, but the Sunni Shia dispute, or more than dispute, the violence, and I think of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, which resulted in all kinds of oppression. And so there's all this negative press. and this negative image, if you will, of Islam, or at least of some interpretations of Islam. So my question to you is, how prevalent, how widespread is the interpretation that you are presenting to us tonight?
I'll tell you something
Yeah.
really interesting, how contextualized our world is. I traveled to Mexico some time ago, and I had a chance to meet not just with some Mexican community members, but also some Colombians. And the Colombians, interestingly enough, they get the same media we do. A lot of the media is the same. But they have almost zero misgivings about Muslims and Islam. Zero. Despite watching the same CNN, the same Fox News, the same everything. You wonder why. Why are they watching the same news? And they have no, because they feel that they were subject to this kind of stereotyping for generations. So they take all of it with a grain of salt. They don't buy any of it. I'll tell you one more story. I was in Qatar, in the Gulf, and I was interviewed by their national TV station. They have one in Arabic and one in English. So the English station interviewed me. And the guy was actually British, old fellow, but he's lived there for maybe 30, 40 years. Said, how is life for you Muslims in America? Are you allowed to pray there? I was like, first of all, I'm a huge fan. I've watched all the Harry Potter films. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, they had this image that Muslims are in like concentration camps in America, and we're not allowed to pray, and we can't get any jobs because we're Muslim, and we're not even allowed to drive, and we have certain hours at the grocery store, you know, where only Muslims can go there. Like, I'm literally talking to them, and you live in Texas? Really, Texas? Like, pew, pew, Texas? Yeah, Texas. So, how prevalent is the view? I can tell you this in a nutshell. There are, in my estimation, this is for the Muslims here too. In my estimation, we're broken up into roughly, a few categories in the Muslim population. We have a very small fringe that is extremely antagonistic and angry, and they are very, very loud. They're extremely loud. On the other end of it, you have a growing population of Muslims who've heard all of this, and they've had an adverse reaction. They want nothing to do with Islam. Muslims who want nothing to do with Islam. In the middle, you have a bunch of different groups of people that are frustrated with how their religion is being talked about. They certainly don't see it in those terms, neither in the hateful rhetoric that still seems to be for Islam, or the hateful rhetoric against Islam. They don't see their Islam in either of those terms, but they feel stifled by the loudness of both of these voices. You know? And I would argue the vast majority of the Muslims, if not all of them sitting in the audience today, represent that majority. A frustrated, silent majority. A frustrated, silent majority. And no matter how much their community leaders speak out and put up a press release or a blog post or whatever else, they simply right now don't have the media sophistication to be the loudest voice on Islam. The loudest voice on Islam continues to be people that are extremely well-funded. ISIS, for example, is the most well-funded terrorist group in human history, according to some records. And they put a lot of money into Facebook or social media advertising. A lot of money. Their production for their extremist videos, the production quality is now at the heels of Hollywood. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous how much sophistication is going into this stuff. What is the response to this? The question is how many people are willing to counter it. My question, my contention, folks, is the battle today is not the battle of weapons or governments. It's not the battle of powers. Today is the battle of influence. It's the battle of influence. And because of the advent of social media, it's a level playing field. We just got to learn to play this game now. And we've got to be able to say that the alternative, the healthy alternative voice on Islam and on Muslims needs to become the loudest voice. That's a Manika perspective, the Arabs have a saying. If you're going to aim high. My personal aspiration is the work on the Quran that I'm doing, not for my own personal popularity or anything. I want it to be the loudest voice on the Quran in the planet. I don't want to have anybody Google Quran without finding stuff that we've done on the Quran before they find anything else. Please understand, government policy, educational institutions, business institutions, cultural trends, all of them are a product of what we're influenced by. So don't underestimate the power of influence. And influence at the end of the day is just the right word. It's just the right word. And you can begin a local, kind of ripple effect of influence in this community, and I hope that you guys do. Inshallah. Okay, I'm so done. I'm so done.